Imagine spending 40 years building the greatest school in the ancient world. Thousands travel across Greece just to sit in your courtyard. Kings write to you for advice they don't dare ignore. Every serious mind in Athens either studied under you or wishes they had. You are Plato, and by any measure available to the ancient world, you have already won. Then one afternoon, a man who owns nothing walks through your gate. He is filthy, sunburned, barefoot. He is carrying a dead chicken. He crosses the courtyard in silence. Your students stop mid-sentence. Nobody stops him. Nobody ever stops him. He drops the chicken at your feet, looks up, and says the only sentence anyone in that courtyard will remember 50 years from now. Behold, Plato's man. The room erupts. Plato says nothing, because this wasn't an insult. It was the opening shot of a war that, 24 centuries later, is still being fought. Not in Athens, in you. Athens had never produced two men more opposite. One wore fine robes and measured his words the way a mathematician measures angles. The other wore whatever he found and said whatever he thought, regardless of who was listening. One believed the truest things in the universe couldn't be touched. The other believed anything you couldn't touch wasn't worth discussing. One built an academy that would outlive empires. The other slept in a ceramic storage jar in the middle of the marketplace, by choice, with nothing stolen from him, because he owned nothing worth stealing. So here's the question this film is going to sit with for the next quarter hour. Which one of them actually understood what a human being is? Stay, and by the end, the answer may be less comfortable than you expect. Before there was a rivalry, there was only a problem, and Plato inherited it in the worst possible way. He watched his teacher, a barefoot and unbearably persistent old man named Socrates, sentenced to death by a jury of 500 ordinary Athenian citizens. Not for a crime, for asking too many questions in public. That afternoon shaped the rest of Plato's life. It taught him something he never unlearned. A crowd, left to its own instincts, can kill the wisest man in the room and call it justice. So Plato spent the next 50 years chasing one question. If people can't be trusted to govern themselves by instinct, what can be trusted? His answer was reason, structure, design. Think about building a temple. You wouldn't stack stones wherever they happen to fall. You'd need a blueprint, an idea of the finished structure that exists before a single stone is laid. Plato believed the whole universe worked this way. Behind every imperfect chair in the material world, he argued, exists a perfect idea of chairness, unchanging, more real than the wood in front of you. He called these forms justice, beauty, the good. The philosopher's job was to spend a lifetime trying to glimpse them beyond what the eyes could show you. It sounds strange today. It didn't sound strange then. It sounded like the first serious attempt to explain why some things are simply, objectively true, why cruelty is wrong in Athens and in Persia, why beauty isn't only whatever the crowd happens to like this year. So he built a school to chase it, the academy, an olive grove outside the city walls, geometry carved above the door, tuition-free, where students weren't taught what Plato thought, but trained to reason the way he reasoned. It worked unreasonably well. Kings corresponded with him. Mathematicians studied under him. A teenager named Aristotle walked through those gates and stayed for 20 years. Plato had made the ancient world a promise it desperately wanted to believe. That chaos isn't the final word. That a disciplined mind, in a disciplined state, can lift human beings above their worst instincts. Everything you associate with a serious education has a birthplace, and you're looking at it. The idea that some claims are true regardless of who's making them, that structured argument should beat a persuasive voice, that a society needs trained minds and not just loud ones. Which makes what happens next a little strange, because the more successful Plato's vision became, the more it began to attract exactly the kind of person it was designed to produce. Nobody remembers exactly when he arrived in Athens. That's fitting. Diogenes never entered a room the way he was supposed to. He'd been exiled from his home city, Sinope, over a scandal involving the coinage. Some say his father was caught debasing the city's currency. Some say Diogenes did it himself, deliberately, as if testing whether the rules governing money were as fixed as everyone assumed. Whatever the truth, he arrived in Athens with nothing, and he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He kept it that way on purpose. He slept in a storage jar near the market because he'd concluded a house was just a possession that had learned to trap its owner. He begged for food, not because he had no other option, but because he wanted to test something most people are too afraid to test. How little does a human being actually require? He barked at people who annoyed him. Literally, the word cynic comes from the Greek for dog, and he wore it as a badge, not an insult. A dog doesn't perform status. It lives exactly as it is, in front of everyone, without shame. He interrupted lectures. He mocked wealthy Athenians to their faces for owning things they didn't need to impress people they didn't like. When someone scolded him for indecent behavior in public, he said he wished hunger could be solved as easily. It would save the city a great deal of misery. By any normal account, this is a disturbed man, a public nuisance the city guard should have removed years ago, except Athens couldn't look away from him. And more strangely, Athens couldn't quite dismiss him either, because underneath every humiliating stunt was a question nobody wanted to answer honestly. If you strip away the property, the title, the reputation, is there anything left of you at all? Most people laughed at Diogenes, then went home and thought about the question longer than they wanted to admit. Almost everything we know about Diogenes comes from a biographer named Diogenes Laertius, writing roughly 500 years after Diogenes died. Closer to us collecting stories about the Salem witch trials than to an eyewitness account. Some of what follows is probably embellished, but these stories were retold for 2,000 years because something true about human nature kept them alive even after the facts got fuzzy. Keep that in mind as we go through what happened next, because what happened next didn't start with philosophy. It started with a chicken. Word had spread through the academy that Plato had, at last, produced a clean definition of what a human being is. After years of careful reasoning, he offered his students a formula elegant enough for geometry. Man is a featherless biped. The students were impressed. It was precise. It was defensible. For a moment, it sounded like philosophy had solved something. The next day, Diogenes walked into the lecture hall carrying a plucked chicken. He threw it onto the floor in front of everyone. Behold, Plato's man. The room dissolved into laughter. Plato, the story goes, was forced to revise his definition on the spot, adding with broad, flat nails to exclude the chicken from the category of human. It's a funny story. It isn't underneath a story about chickens. It's a story about two completely different theories of what a definition is even for. Plato believed a good definition captures something essential and unchanging, that careful reasoning can pin down the truth of a thing in words. Diogenes believed the opposite, that definitions are a kind of trap, that the moment you compress a living, breathing, contradictory human being into a tidy sentence, you've already lost the thing that mattered. We still run head first into this argument, constantly. Every performance review that reduces a year of your work to a number. Every dating profile that reduces a person to 5 photos and 3 interests. Every resume that reduces a decade of your life to bullet points a recruiter will scan for 6 seconds. We are still, in a sense, trying to catch Plato's chicken. Diogenes carried almost nothing: a cloak, a walking stick, a knapsack, and a single wooden cup for drinking on the road. One afternoon at a public well, he watched a child kneel down, scoop water into cupped hands, and drink. No cup, no hesitation, no sense of lacking anything at all. Diogenes reached into his bag, took out his cup, and threw it away. He had spent years training himself to need almost nothing. A child who had never trained for anything had just quietly outsimplified him. The lesson wasn't own less. Plenty of philosophers said that. The lesson was sharper. Whatever you currently think is your bare minimum is probably still more than you need. There's always another layer of essential hiding underneath the one you already found. Look around whatever room you're in right now. How much of it is actually load-bearing in your life? and how much of it is just a cup you haven't gotten around to throwing away yet. In the middle of the day, under a cloudless sky, Diogenes lit a lantern and walked into the busiest part of Athens. People stopped him confused. Why carry a light when the sun is directly overhead? He held it up to their faces and said, "I am looking for an honest man." He searched the whole city. Politicians, mid-argument. Merchants, mid-negotiation. Priests, mid-ceremony. He held the lantern up to each of them in turn. The story doesn't end with him finding one. Sit with that. Not because Athens had no honest people in it, almost certainly it did. Diogenes wasn't grading individuals. He was pointing the light at something structural. A city where saying exactly what you meant, all the time, to everyone, had quietly become a kind of madness only a man with nothing left to lose could afford. Hold on to that lantern. We're coming back to it before this film ends. By now, Diogenes' reputation had traveled further than Athens, far enough to reach a 20-year-old about to conquer most of the known world. Alexander the Great, passing through Corinth with an army at his back and kings bowing at his feet, asked to meet the philosopher who mocked kings for sport. He found Diogenes sitting outside his jar in the sun, doing nothing in particular. Alexander stood over him, the most powerful human being alive, casting his shadow over the poorest man in Greece. "Ask me for anything," Alexander said. "Anything at all." Every advisor within earshot expected gold, land, a title. Diogenes looked up and said, "Move. You're blocking my sunlight." Alexander's own men reportedly laughed, and Alexander, so the story goes, walked away and told them that if he weren't Alexander, he would want to be Diogenes. This wasn't defiance for its own sake, and it wasn't a performance of courage. Diogenes genuinely didn't want anything Alexander could give him, and a man who wants nothing from you is the one kind of man you cannot rule. Ask yourself, honestly, how many people currently hold some version of that power over you? Not armies, but approval. A promotion you're chasing. A follower count you check before breakfast. Every one of them is, in some small way, currently blocking your sunlight. Most of us don't have the nerve Diogenes had to simply ask them to move. Here's the turn this film has been building toward. Diogenes was never really trying to defeat Plato. There's no real evidence he even disliked him personally. He mocked Plato's ideas relentlessly, and by most accounts, respected his mind. What Diogenes was actually fighting was bigger than one man. He was fighting the kind of human being civilization was starting to manufacture. Obedient, credentialed, impressive on paper, and slowly, quietly disconnected from anything real underneath the performance. Plato wanted to build a civilization capable of reason. Diogenes wanted to make sure that civilization never forgot what the reasoning was for. Here's the part most documentaries skip because it complicates the ending they want to sell you. Plato won. Decisively. Almost embarrassingly. Every university on Earth is, in some structural sense, a grandchild of his academy. Every scientific method that insists a claim needs evidence, not just confidence, is doing something recognizably Platonic. Every legal system built on written, impartial law instead of the mood of whoever's currently in charge. That's the dream Plato was chasing, largely realized. Diogenes left behind no school, no movement, no writings that survived in his own hand. He died, by most accounts, more or less as he'd lived, owning almost nothing, in a manner nobody could quite agree on afterward. If this were only a story about who won, it would already be over. But something strange happened on the way to Plato's total victory. The more completely his vision succeeded, the bigger, more organized, more credentialed civilization became, the more people started quietly, almost embarrassingly, wanting to be Diogenes instead. Not homeless. Almost nobody wants his actual life. But look at what keeps resurfacing, decade after decade, underneath all our progress. The appeal of owning less. The suspicion that a bigger title might just be a nicer jar. The exhausted recognition, some night at 11 o'clock, that a life engineered entirely around impressing people you don't even like might not be the life you'd choose if anyone had honestly asked you first. We built Plato's world, and somewhere inside it, We keep reaching for Diogenes' lantern. Remember the lantern, the one he carried through Athens at noon, searching for one honest man. He never found one worth naming. Maybe that was never really the point. Maybe it was never meant to end up pointed at a stranger. Maybe it was always meant to end up here. Because here's the question underneath everything Diogenes ever did. The one he'd ask if he showed up outside your door tomorrow morning. With no crowd, no history books, no chicken. If I took away your job title, your degree, your apartment, your follower count, everything people currently admire you for, who would be standing there? Most people spend a lifetime arranging their days, so they never have to answer that. Diogenes built his entire life as the answer. Plato taught the world how to build something worth having. Diogenes made sure we never forgot to ask whether we were still the ones living inside it, or whether, somewhere along the way, it had quietly started living inside us. Both of those things are true. Civilization needs its architects. It also needs someone willing to walk through the finished building at noon, lantern lit, asking a question nobody invited. So we're back where we started. A courtyard, a chicken, a silence Plato never quite broke. Except now you know what that silence actually was. It wasn't defeat. It was recognition. The philosopher you quote is far less important than the one you quietly become. If Diogenes showed up outside your door tomorrow with his lantern lit, would he keep walking or would he stop at you? Who actually won, Plato or Diogenes? Say it in the comments. I'll read every one.